Hi there, my name is Kirk White. I first became involved with Dr. Clark's work about 10 years ago. Somebody handed me one of her books. It said, "The Cure for All Diseases." I thought, gee, that's a pretty bold statement. I don't think so. But after studying the book for some months, I decided it was really good information. There's a lot of science in it anybody could use. She says that if you put deodorant under your arm, in 2 minutes you can find aluminum in your brain. And if you put deodorant under your arm, in 2 minutes you can find propyl alcohol in your liver with a little device she invented that she calls a synchrometer. It's made with Radio Shack parts, about $60 worth of parts. The book is an incredible piece of information and really worth reading, and thank you for buying the book you bought. I worked with Dr. Clark now about 5 years as an understudy, as an unpaid understudy, and I find it's most fascinating. She's without question one of the most brilliant minds on the planet. I hope you enjoy the video, and I hope you can gain a lot of information for yourself, and maybe you can save a life. Thank you so much. By the way, Dr. Clark says you can copy this and give it to as many friends as you like. It may save a lot of lives. Thank you. Morning, Dr. Clark. How are you?
Good morning. Fine. So this does look for all the world like a worm, only I'd never seen one like this before. And without staining it, you can't get a better idea. But it has to be a plant or animal. So first thing I would check for is plant, food residue in other words. And if anything, it could come from, say, a banana or plantain, which we use in our diet. So that would be the first thing I would test. And here's a banana, so I would test that first. And that's it.
What do you know? That was a positive indication from the synchrometer.
Usually it doesn't go that fast because I have to guess what the possibilities are. I can't go through a long list. Maybe sometime in the future that can be done. The circuitry is already available to where I wouldn't have to have the actual item for testing. But I'm still at the manual stage, and I prefer it that way.
But actually you could have made a water copy of that.
Yes, I could have. And also it would distinguish between banana and plantains or so it has very acute sensitivity to differences, little differences.
Now if you weren't so conscious of all of the things going on and so adept at figuring out what something might be, first knowing the food and the patients, what else would you have checked for that?
If I couldn't find it to be a food residue, I would go through all my parasite collection. I have about 50 or 60 parasites, and I would go through them even if it didn't look like it, because well, that's just my procedure in order not to miss anything. And I have those on slides like this, microscope slides. So if this has a parasite on it or part of a parasite, it would be positive if it was that parasite.
Certainly, yeah. Well, that's a phenomenal approach, and it's interesting how someone can take a totally unknown substance in a matter of minutes, determine whether it's plant or animal, and then go right down the chain of parasites and determine what parasite it would be.
There are errors you do have to look out for, because nothing comes from the toilet bowl purely clean and uncontaminated with other parasites. So that's something to watch for, and we need to clean this up. But this was, I think, this is already in formaldehyde, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So it has been cleaned up because it looked so much like a parasite that it was worth doing that cleanup.
And actually with that sample you might be able to determine if Ascaris was in the system of the patient?
Yes.
Because it would perhaps be attached or be involved there?
Yes, you could.
Even Fasciolopsis busci or some of the
Yes.
other parasites.
Yes, you could do that. Yes.
At any rate, I think that's a worthwhile experiment. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hello there again.
Hello.
Hey, I just love to come in and interrupt you when you're doing things and stick a camera in your face and say, hey, what are you doing? You know? And I had to leave a moment ago because I'd been fooling with formaldehyde and didn't have any voice left. Well, what's the antidote for formaldehyde? Just off, if you happen to know.
Cysteine and taurine.
Cysteine and taurine?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Very interesting.
So
Interesting.
you would take maybe one capsule of either one or both.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Well, I drank some
It's
water.
quite
and
bad
it was just,
for you.
Yeah.
Formaldehyde, certainly for lungs.
Yeah. Well, that was interesting. I have to remember now not to prepare things with formaldehyde before I try to talk.
Yes, and a person shouldn't have any open formaldehyde in the house. Of course, we have it all the time in other forms. It's a standard air pollutant that we test for.
Uh-huh.
It's in my set of air pollutants that we test for,
Mm-hmm.
because there's formaldehyde in foam bedding, formaldehyde in your new clothing that has, if it has never been washed or dry cleaned,
Mm-hmm.
and formaldehyde coming maybe from your cupboards, if they're new wood, some kind of paneling,
So the glue that they would use on the paneling and
possibly.
the glue they use to put the tile down, the back of carpets, the list
Maybe.
would
I
perhaps
don't
go
know
on.
all the places, but
Yeah.
but people with lung cancer usually have an excessive amount of lung of air pollutants
Uh-huh.
that bother the lung, cause the lung to be inflamed.
Mm-hmm. Including radon, including vanadium
Yes.
from the gas stove, and
Yes.
radon from the earth. And
Yes.
Well, tell me what you're doing here. What?
We have a patient with cancer in two places, which is so unusual to have a cancer occurring on the face and in the lower abdomen, and nowhere else. I thought this must be coming from her teeth, but she has full dentures, and that would then be a surprise since it's not coming from tooth fillings. So I'm checking her dentures to see if they're radioactive. And you can see what I'm testing for. This is just the name of the person. I have them in a little bit of well water or any kind of water, because even if the water might have some copper or lead in it from the water pipes, that's not going to disturb the test. I'm not looking for copper or lead. I'm looking for polonium, which is the radioactive element causing cancer, but it's not the only thing. The polonium is complex to cerium, cerium being a lanthanide, but radioactive things from the earth, mainly the radon series, and other things coming up from the uranium down below the earth. Those things react with each other. The lanthanides and the radioactive elements come up in the same space because they come up from the uranium rocks that are under the surface of the earth. And polonium and cerium are extremely reactive, and they react with each other immediately, so that you get this little polonium-cerium complex. And you'll see that here. I'm testing for polonium in this denture that's in a little bit of water in a plastic bag. And of course there are two entities there, the teeth themselves and the rest of the pink part of the denture. And I'm just soaking the whole thing to see if that might be a source of her carcinogen. There it is, very high. It's seeping polonium. And I'll look for cerium because cerium is used in dental plastic. You can find that right on the internet. It's terrible that a great deal of research on cerium was done in the first half century of the last century already. Cerium came into use, and they never did search for an effect that might be contributing to cancer, I suppose. Because I find it in every cancer case, it's part of the carcinogen causing the cancer.
Part of the complex. Yes. Part of the complex between the polonium and cerium.
Yes. The carcinogen isn't a single entity, it's a large complex. And it starts with polonium, and that is complex to cerium. Yes, we would expect, this is cerium, we would expect it to be exuding it because it's plastic. If we harden the plastic enough, it would not diffuse out. But that generally isn't done. It's only hardened for the sake of its physical durability, and instead of how much it diffuses out.
And if you were to harden it the normal way by putting it in a pan of water and cool water and letting it build up to the bubble point but not boil, would that solidify the plastic sufficient to keep the radiation from coming out?
No, but it would keep the cerium from coming out. But it would not keep the polonium from having its action.
So these dentures then must be replaced with non-polluted denture material.
Yeah. The reason this got polluted is because they were using Clorox bleach in the dental supplies, and that's what I would test next. First, let me see if the polonium diffusing out and the cerium diffusing out are already complexed. It takes only seconds for that to happen, just as though it was, say, hydrogen and oxygen or sodium and chlorine. If they came in contact with each other, they would react immediately. And this goes very fast too. There's the complex, complete, ready to form the complete carcinogen. Complete carcinogen, you have to add the rest of the whole complex, and that comes from Clorox bleach too. The ferrocyanide would be found in the Clorox bleach. In the NSF bleach, which we always consider the good bleach or the better bleach, has ferricyanide. It's also very harmful, of course. Any cyanide that you're eating that isn't a plant material, has to be detoxified by the body in a special way, which is quite a drain on the body's resources. The body needs its resources to detoxify the natural cyanide-containing food. About half of our food has cyanide molecules in it, and that's why they're called cyanogens, but they're not toxic, whereas something that's human-made is much more likely to be toxic. And certainly these cyanides that are added to the water to keep the pipes from developing scale and from corroding is very toxic. No matter what the literature says, the literature goes back many years, and maybe it just ought to be repeated. The experiments on these cyanides called ferricyanide and ferrocyanide were done 100 years ago already, and they came to the conclusion that they were not very toxic. That doesn't mean enough.
But if it's in your mouth, that's a whole different story.
Yes.
And if you're a cancer patient that can't detoxify these things, then you're really in trouble.
Right. One of the mutations that this big carcinogen makes, besides the cancer mutations, is that no rhodanese will be made. That is one of the mutations that this mutagen, a carcinogen is a mutagen at the same time. A carcinogen that can cause cancer is also causing mutations, so that makes it a mutagen also. So here we will see whether the entity from Clorox bleach, which is ferrocyanide, this ounces potassium ferrocyanide, whether that is exuding from this denture and diffusing into the body. Yes, large amounts. So now you have the third item that is in the carcinogen. It forms a chain. These are the first three members. The next item is an alkylating agent derived from onions, garlic, mustard, and we have synthetic alkylating agents too that are used as chemotherapy because they are so deadly. But ordinary onions, garlic, and mustard make them too. We're not meant to eat much of that, if any. Now the literature will gloss over that and say you don't need to worry that this might be coming from the mustard you're eating or the garlic. Those things have their good attributes too, but this is much more important, and I think we should stop using those foods because we make these alkylating agents from them. And here are a few. Here's mustard. You wouldn't expect that from an inanimate thing, of course. The alkylating agent doesn't come from the Clorox bleach. It comes from the food you eat.
Uh-huh. Now, I was confused. Was that positive or negative? I didn't listen.
Negative.
That was negative, okay.
Here is diallosulfide that would come from onions. And you wouldn't expect that to come from a non-living thing. Here's allyl alcohol, another onion-like compound. There are very many alkylating agents coming from these three kinds of foods, and they form part of the carcinogen. It's the next part. So
and
you
you're
have
checking.
to have that.
And you're checking an inanimate thing, the dentures, just.
Yes.
And you wouldn't normally check for that because you know it's not there because it's not a
Right.
food item.
Right.
I
But
see.
for
Yeah.
sake of demonstration,
Right.
that lets you use your own knowledge and logic to arrive at new research results. You would want to do a complete experiment like this. Forms the fourth entity, and the fifth entity is another living thing that comes from the body. The contribution to this carcinogen is partly the environment, partly the body. The body supplies the alkylating agent and the parasite. In this case, the parasite should be, if it was coming from the dentures, which of course it can't, but for the sake of the experiment, I would look for the busky, and of course it would be negative.
Factiolopsis busky. So if
But
it were a food
another
item, you'd
interesting
check with
one
those things.
would be isopropyl alcohol, and another one, malonic acid. We can see if that's coming from this. Malonic acid is discussed quite a bit in my books because I found it in all tumors going back many years.
And malonic
Obviously
acid,
positive.
and that's used as a denture material and sometimes as a hardening agent even,
No,
isn't it?
it's just present in most industrial-made compounds. Why it is there is probably because it's so universally useful in the chemistry of manufacturing various synthetic substances. It's just about universally present.
That's malonic acid.
And it does exude from these dentures. Now the malonic acid will be making its contribution on this carcinogen that is building here from these dentures, and I want to see whether the malonic acid combines here or here or here, so that we can do a kind of chemistry here. Possibly you could call it mimicking the reality, because this is a capacitor, and you can do a mimicking experiment on this the way you can with a computer.
By the close proximity of one substance to the other on the plate.
This makes it in series.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So that's not where it's attached. That was negative.
Uh-huh.
That's where it is attached.
And that substance is?
Malonic acid. And this is, it's attached to cerium.
It's attached to the cerium molecule.
Now, polonium is very, very reactive too, so we'll see whether it could combine here. Yes, so it has two places to attach, and now let's take a look at isopropyl alcohol, because we do find malonic acid and isopropyl alcohol in every tumor. So it's part of the carcinogen, but to find out just what role it plays, you would do this kind of simple mimicking chemistry.
So what we're doing here is finding what the cerium and the polonium complex are tied to molecularly.
Yes.
And the malonic acid happened to be the substance, is that correct?
Yes. Another one is isopropyl alcohol.
Okay. Which
So-
is a ubiquitous product.
Yes. The Clorox bleach has isopropyl alcohol, whereas the NSF bleach does not.
And as we've discussed in the past, the Clorox bleach also has wheel-bearing grease and
Yes.
Probably-
Motor oil,
probably
3-in-1 oil.
benzene.
All the things that, yes, there's always benzene in it. And so the NSF bleach is a lot cleaner, but it is not non-toxic. It has the ferricyanide, and it has other toxic substances too.
And how does the wheel-bearing grease and the benzene and those things get into the laundry bleach or the Clorox bleach to begin with?
I imagine it's just from their heavy duty machinery that they use to dig in a quarry or a hillside for the components of the bleach.
Or the pumping material, or the whatever they use to clean pipes and things with. Could go on and on. Yeah.
Possibly. I don't have
Mhm.
real knowledge
Hard
about
data on that. Yeah.
So now I'm checking to see if isopropyl alcohol has been diffusing from this denture into the water. The denture is in some water. So whatever has diffused from the denture is in the water, and then there's the denture besides.
In just even a short period of time.
I would
probably
say
have.
that I had let it sit there for about 20 minutes or half an hour.
Uh-huh. So it actually leaches into the water, and
Yes.
there it is.
Yes. That's a pretty high amount. Although
Uh-huh.
it's not a quantitative device, the amount of the current could make it quantitative. But because it's still manually operated, the pressure that you're using also changes the amount of current, so you can't begin to decide on any quantity.
Right. But the sensitivity, how would you rate the sensitivity of the syncrometer? 10 to the
it's
minus
extremely
10th or
good.
10 to the
much
minus
better
12th?
than that, better than that.
10 to the minus 15th
I
of a
would say
gram?
10 to the minus 15th is probably average, and that varies a bit with the person and the time.
You know, in your laboratory here, you've got so many samples of so many things that you've collected over many years. How many tests do you think you've made at the syncrometer since you began to play with it 10 years ago or so?
Oh my.
Huh?
That's pretty hard to guess.
Maybe 100,000 or 200,000
yes,
or
yes.
who knows, maybe
Yes.
500,000. Because sometimes when I'm here, I see you do maybe 400 or 600 tests in a day.
Yes.
Not at all.
That's over 1,000 a day.
Over 1,000 a day when you're working with
If
for
I'm
the
using,
patients.
if I'm working with study material or patient material, in other words, a busy day,
Mhm.
if I'm putting in, say, an 8-hour day of testing,
Mhm.
it would certainly be 1,000.
1,000 a day, and you've been doing this for 15 years, roughly.
Well, let's say a little shorter.
A little
From
shorter?
the time that I got doing this much is probably only 10 years.
Only 10 years. And as I've seen you work 7 days a week, except maybe Sunday afternoon for a couple hours when you do your laundry.
Well, it's not quite that bad. But of course, patient results can't wait, and this is much better than waiting for some lab to be able to come up with an analysis.
Yeah, it would take lots of money and lots of time for them to come up with analysis for what you do in seconds.
Propyl alcohol is attached to the cerium too.
You lined that up again there. Okay.
This is the isopropyl. The other one was malonic acid.
So I see.
I'm showing you a property of cerium. You can read this in the literature on cerium. There's a lot of research literature. The book that I show that I have a picture of in my books is called Lanthanides, and cerium is one.
Is there anybody else in the world that has done even a small part of what you've done here? Are they able to
no.
without the syncrometer?
No, you couldn't do that.
No.
This is much more technical sophistication than what is being used to find data on the human or animal body. All that there is a voltmeter measuring voltages, and that is pretty old. We just haven't advanced the technology for biological investigation.
If I were to use my imagination and guess that maybe you could put the probe on an area of skin where there's a suspected tumor, maybe a lump, could you detect the presence of the tumor with that? Could you also detect what was in that tumor? Like, is it Fasciolopsis busci?
Yes.
Does it contain benzene?
Yes.
Does it contain ferric and ferrocyanide?
Yes, we can certainly
You can do that just by touching the probe
Yes,
to a tumor suspected area,
yes.
and you can.
And in fact, we do that all the time in order to see what's going on with that person's tumor, and we call it skin scanning or body wipe scanning, so that we have the equivalent of an X-ray.
Then somebody can take a suspected tumor on a breast, let's say,
Yes.
and rub it with a damp paper towel that's a pure paper towel.
Yes.
Put that in a baggie, put it in here, put it on a plate,
Mm-hmm.
and you can tell if that is in fact an active tumor.
Yes.
And
or whether it's benign or so on. You can
That's
test for
absolute-
anything that you want to as a biochemist.
That's absolutely phenomenal.
Yes, it is.
Is anybody else in the world doing this?
Well, I'm hoping so, because I wrote that down in the last book called Prevention of All Cancers. I wrote down the flow sheet, how you would go from one thing to the next in order to make a logical story out of what you were investigating, and how to have what you need to come up with to have a successful ending for the patient. You would start with the patient. I think there are 107 tests like this. You see how fast they go. And you travel from number 1 to 107, and by the time they are all correct, you have a cured case.